Good evening and welcome to Bible Study Hub. So glad that you're here with us. I'm Ann, and we are still going through the book of Genesis. And we ended last week kind of in the middle almost of the story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son Isaac. And so we just said, what an incredible thing, and the parallels between what Abraham was asked to do and the God of the universe who looked down on this knowing that in many ways this was a foreshadow of what he would do someday when he sacrificed his own son, except he actually went through with it, where Abraham was kept from doing it. So we're just going to pick up where we left off in Genesis chapter 22, and we'll just start with verse 15 through 19. So here we go. It says, "And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven." The first time was when he said, "Don't do it, stop." "And said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies," which just means he will rule over his enemies. "And in your offspring shall all the nations of earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba, which is at the southern end of the promised land, the area of Canaan at this time. So last week, one of you, Emily, asked a question regarding this idea of your only son, that only after the Bible study did I realize that I completely like ran past that question and I was already thinking about what was coming next, so I didn't process what you were asking. So Emily, I want to answer your question that I did not answer last week well at all, because it just came up again. Her question was basically, so God called Isaac Abraham's only son? And I was like, yeah. Well, he did, but the inherent in the question is, well, hold on a minute. Isaac was not Abraham's only son, right? It was Ishmael as well. He had two sons at this point, and Isaac was one of two. So why did God refer to Isaac as Abraham's only son? It's a great question. So I did a little research into that question, because I honestly didn't, when I realized what Emily had asked, I was like, oh, I'm kind of glad I went past that, because I don't think I knew the answer to it. So here's what I found, is that in this time, in the Bible, in ancient times, sonship was very much tied to inheritance. And so when God said your only son, he wasn't meaning like only excluding any other possibility of having another son. He meant your only son of sonship, like inheritance, the only heir to your promises that I have given to you. That's the sense in which it was said. It did not mean to exclude that he had any other sons. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. God goes on to kind of reaffirm his covenant with Abraham. And for the very first time, we hear that not only will the descendants be like the stars of the sky, but now they will also be like the sand of the seashore. So God adds that little tidbit to it to just kind of paint this amazing picture of what is going to come with Abraham's descendants. And then he says, all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. And of course, that is mostly referring to the coming Messiah and the salvation that would be offered to all peoples of the earth through Jesus Christ, who came through the line of Abraham. So I'm sure Abraham didn't have the foggiest idea the extent of what these promises meant. But of course, God in his omniscience could see the whole big picture, and he knew exactly what he was promising. So verses 20 to 24 are just kind of a lot of genealogy type things. So I'm not going to try to pronounce all those names. It's important, it's there for a reason, but for our purposes, we're going to scoot past it. We're going to go right on to chapter 23. So you can turn the page, and we're in chapter 23, verses 1 to 2. And so here we go. It says, Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba. Hope I pronounced that right. That is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. This is a man of God, and he mourns the death of his wife. He cries. The Bible never, ever expects us to handle grief and loss and death in some kind of stoic fashion. That we are always the men of God, the greatest men of God in the Bible are seen weeping and mourning. I mean, not just Abraham, there are multiples of this over the loss of their loved ones. And I love that because it gives us that confidence and that permission to be really sad when we lose a loved one. It's to be expected that you would be. Well, we're not told how Sarah dies or why she dies. 127 sounds really old, and I guess it is, but Abraham lives to be 175. So it seems as though her death maybe is slightly premature, but for whatever it was, Abraham does the typical burial custom of the day, which is that he would take her body, he would lay it out in a tent, and then he would spend some alone time with the body, grieving, like we said, crying and mourning over that. Now he's got a problem, however, because he needs to bury her. He needs to put her body in a tomb. But where he's living right now, he doesn't own a tomb. He doesn't own land with a tomb on it. He is a sojourner in the land. He doesn't own anything. So he needs to figure this one out. And so we will see how he does this. And it's actually this whole Bible study tonight. If you like culture, if you like history, you're going to really enjoy this because there's a lot of cultural and historical things in here that just make the text really come alive. So verses 3 to 4 of chapter 23, sorry. And Abraham rose up from before his dead, and he said to the Hittites who were living in the land, I am a sojourner and a foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place that I may bury my dead out of my sight. So he obviously tells them, you all know I'm just a sojourner. I'm not a Hittite. I'm not one of you, and I have a bit of a problem here. I need to get a tomb for my wife. It sounds in the text right there like he's asking them to donate it. We'll find out in a minute. He's absolutely not doing that. He wants to buy it from them, and I'm sure that they know that. But let's talk about this one phrase because it comes up again in verse 8, that I may bury the dead out of my sight. I read that and I thought, well, that is a very strange thing to say. And then when I dropped down to verse 8 and I read it again, I thought, okay, wait a minute. Something's going on with this. That is not a phrase that we would typically use in our culture. It sounds almost harsh and cold, like I need to get them out of my sight. So again, whenever you see, we've talked about this before, something that is just a little strange, a little off sounding, usually if you can go back and you can figure out the culture of the day, maybe it's a language thing, maybe it's just a cultural thing, you can normally come to this broader understanding of what's going on. So here's the reason that he said that. In this time period, in pagan cultures, they would very often, when they had a loved one die, they would make a little statue of that person or some sort of a picture of them. Maybe it was a plaque with their face on it to the best of their ability, but they would come up with some tangible thing to represent the deceased. And then the best way I can describe it in terms that we would understand is that they would build kind of a shrine for it. And they would pray to it. They would consider that this person in the form of metal or wood or whatever it was still with them, that that person was watching over them, was responsible for protecting them. They would ask that person, like praying to the person to bless them and to take care of certain things. So this was a very, very common practice, this spiritualized ancestor worship type of deal. So what Abraham is actually saying here is, I am going to bury my dead out of my sight. In other words, he's telling them without being like frontal in your face, unkind or weird about it. He's just saying, I will not be doing what you do. I will not be making a shrine to Sarah. I will not be making an image of Sarah. She will be buried out of my sight. She will be gone from me, is what he is saying here. And I just sat back and I thought, what a man of integrity this is, that he would, even in his darkest moment, which this has to be his darkest moment ever, he's so sorrowful over the loss of his wife, in his mind, he wants to still make sure that he communicates that because of his belief in the one real true God, he will not be participating in the practices that they do in their religion. And he just simply states it. I need to bury my dead out of my sight. Now, if we can just hang on that for a second, I don't know about you, but for me in my life, I spend most of my life trying to make sure that I do not fall into the trap of being deceived by Satan and his ways in some way, shape, or form. I mean, really, our whole lives are just spent trying to discern truth from error, what is real from what is not real, what is biblical from what is not biblical, to wade through that somehow, some way, to the best of our ability with the help of the Holy Spirit, and not be led into error that is so prevalent all around us. So I'm always looking for what I call the fingerprints of Satan on things. When I see something in current culture that has its roots in ancient paganism, that sets off something in my mind. And when I read something in the Bible that also alerts me to, whoa, that sounds an awful lot like some things that I see today, again, the light goes on and I go, whoa, I want to make sure that I'm not falling into this type of error. So let me say this in the kindest, most compassionate, loving way that I can, because I know that many of you watching have, in even just recent year or two, have lost loved ones, husbands, wives, children, parents, and the grief is still very, very real, and you are still very much walking through the grieving process. So please know that this is not to blow up your world in any way. But I also respect you enough to tell you the truth. And so I want us to be aware, if you haven't already put it together in your mind, of how this ancient pagan practice is even carried over into our world today, where we think we're so sophisticated. I often hear people talk about things like, you lose a loved one and they say to you, your dad or your mom or whoever it is that passed away, they're still with you. They're still with you. And you don't want to be unkind. Thank you. But in my mind, when my dad died and a lot of people told me he's still with you, I just wanted to say, no, he's not. He's not with me. He's in a much better place. I'm so thankful that he's not still here. He's in heaven with Jesus. He's not still with me. Or they'll see something like, they think that the people that have passed on are sending them signs and signals. They'll say, oh, look, I found this leaf in the shape of a heart. My loved one that passed on, they're always sending me hearts, and I'm seeing these hearts everywhere. And that's my loved one sending me signals that they're still with. No, they're not. No. People will often think cardinals are, I guess, their deceased loved ones kind of like visiting. I don't know where that came from. I'm sure if I studied it, I would know the history of the cardinal, but no, their loved ones are not in the cardinals. Do you see the connection here? That this is what the pagan people in Abraham's day were doing, and honestly, it's what we continue sometimes to do even in our day. So here's what I want you to know. The Bible is clear that when we do die, for those of us who are in Christ Jesus, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. You are no longer, your spirit's not going to be floating around here. You will be home with the Lord in heaven, home with Jesus. I mean, what a grace is that? I love my life, but I look forward to being released from the sinful world around me, and quite frankly, from my own sin. So I think it's comforting when you know the Lord, to know that is where you're not going to come back as a bird, and you're not going to be dropping hearts or chickens or whatever it is that the person thinks you're leaving for them. You're not in spirit floating around the earth. The dead are out of the people's sight because they're not there. They're not there anymore. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that to make sure that we all are on the same page with that. I'm just looking at your comments here. Okay, good. Glad to know that my video is not freezing for most people. I almost work for Verizon. I want you to know I spent so many hours with them. I think I may be on staff. I'm trying really hard to fix my problems. But anyway, Dottie is just saying regarding the topic we just talked about. Absolutely agree, and I'm so glad. Margie is saying they often people will say, "Oh, he or she is watching over you." That and you're right, that's another, yeah, that's another one that people say. And I mean, you can see why. I was listening to a speaker just a couple days ago at camp that my husband goes to every summer. It's about an hour from us, and they have a lot of really good speakers. So we like to go and listen to the speakers. And the man just said something that I just thought was brilliant. He said, anybody who tries to tell you that death is a natural thing, death is natural. He said that could not be the furthest thing from the truth. Death is not natural. That is not how God ever designed it to be. It only because of sin did death come into the picture for you to be ripped from communication and contact from somebody that you love. That is not natural. And his point was, we say things like that, and the world says stuff like that because somehow that kind of eases us into this lull of thinking that everything is fine instead of really thinking about, well, what does happen after death? And am I ready for that? Do I know where I'm going? That's something I should be thinking about. So you can see how crafty Satan is on those things. So anyway, Abraham doesn't beat them over the head with it. He just simply states it. He's going to state it again in a minute, but let's go on to verses 5 to 9. The Hittites answered Abraham, "Hear us, my lord. You are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead." Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land. And he said to them, "If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight," there it is, "hear me and entreat me for me, Ephron, the son of Zohar." He says, "Go get Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place." So the cultural negotiating here is really interesting. And it's kind of like what we do. And I want you to know this ahead of time because if you don't understand the cultural negotiating, this all seems weird and rude. But let me just put it in these terms. If you were to go out to lunch with a friend and you say to your friend, "Hey, I'm picking up the tab tonight. This or lunch today. I'm picking up the tab today. It's my treat. Get whatever you want." If your friend were to say, "Okay," that would just strike you as, "Okay, well, it's kind of rude." You wouldn't know what to do with that. What is expected is that your friend says, "What? No, 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 you don't need to do that." Now, again, if at this juncture you say, "Oh, okay," and you make them pay for their own, again, that would be seen as very rude. Like, we know how this goes, right? "Hey, I want to pick up your meal. It's on me. Get whatever you want." "Oh, no, you don't need to do that." And then your response is going to be, "No, no, I really, really want to. Please let me do this." And then they have to say, "Are you sure? Oh, really? Are you sure? Oh, I feel kind of bad." And then it ends with you saying, "Absolutely, I really want to do this." And at that point, they are free to accept your offer. This is cultural, guys. I mean, we don't really think too much about it, but we could have saved ourselves like a minute and a half by just simply cutting to the chase. "I'm going to buy your lunch." "Okay, thanks." But we don't do it that way. Same thing is going on here with Abraham negotiating the price of this land and who he's paying. And unlike us, where it ends up that the person who's offering is the one who wins, in this case, it's like flipped the other way. So we'll go on and you're going to see what I mean here. Verses 10 to 11. Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, so he must have stood up to talk, of all who went into the gate of his city. "No, no, Lord, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead." So this is the back and forth. "No, no, no, you can't pay me for this. I want to give it to you." The gate, by the way, is where all the business took place. So that's why they're at the gate right now. So let's go on. Then Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, "But if you will hear me, I give the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there." Now here it is. Ephron answered Abraham, "My Lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. See, this is where to us it sounds really rude. Like, are you kidding me? No, take it. Take the land. The land worth, 400 shekels. Just take it. He just works that in. But again, it's all culture. That was to be expected. That's how they did it. So Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So he acts completely within the bounds of social norms. He pays the full asking price for the field. He doesn't try to negotiate him down. He acts with complete honor. And I just think his conduct with these unbelievers is just perfect. Like everything he does here is so perfect. It's really worth taking time to kind of think through how Abraham deals with those who are not believers in God, how he is not afraid to put forth his beliefs and his standards, but he doesn't do it in a caustic way. And when it comes time to negotiate this cave that he would like, he follows the cultural norms perfectly. There's nothing wrong with that. And at the end of the day, he pays the fair price that was asked without trying to negotiate it down or get it for free. And I just go, hats off. And no wonder these guys really respected Abraham. I mean, you can tell that they had loads of respect for him. They're like, my Lord, you are a prince of the gods among us. They have huge respect for him already. Well, Lot, as you remember, they had no respect for him. So you can really see the difference of how a life is lived out. Now we're about to do another story here, and it has another cultural thing that just seems really, really weird to us. I told you tonight's jam-packed with them. If you are to take an oath in court in our day, you will put your left hand on a Bible, you will raise your right hand, and you will say your oath. That's, to us, is extremely normal. We don't think twice about it. In Abraham's day, that's not how they did it. Whether in court or not in court, they would put a hand under a thigh. I know it sounds so bizarre to us. Like it's hard to even picture this, and how uncomfortable would that have been to watch? But that's how they did it. So I want you to know before we start chapter 24 that that's what's going on here. So chapter 24, verses 1-4. Now, Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, he says to him, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son, Isaac, from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. So Abraham here is about 140. He lives to 175. So he's not at the end yet, but he's getting up there. So let me ask you this as a group, and I want you to start commenting. I want to hear your answers. Why does Abraham not want Isaac to marry a local girl? So Abraham now has lived in this land for quite some time. I mean, he must know people, right? And they respect him. It seems like he has good relationships with the Canaanites there in the land. And yet he is absolutely adamant and incredibly concerned that this servant not take a wife for Isaac from the Canaanites. He wants him to go back to Mesopotamia, where Abraham moved from years before, and get a wife for Isaac from there. Abraham apparently either thinks he is too old or is too old to go back to do it himself. So he's tasking the servant. So why do you think that Abraham is so adamant that he does not want Isaac to end up with a wife from amongst the people that he is currently living among? Looking forward to hearing your comments on that. So I will wait for you to comment. Always have a bit of a delay here. Makes it a little awkward. Here we go. Roberta says, because they were not believers of God, but of many gods. Right. They were polytheists. Emily said, to fortify relationship with the other towns, I would think local alliances were very important. That's a really interesting thought. I had not thought of that. Very good. Let's see. Susie says, because of their beliefs or culture. Okay, great. Whoops. These are bumping up on me. Somebody is saying, so that Isaac would not be drawn off into their paganism. So I think that's kind of reflecting on what Susie just said, the beliefs and the culture infiltrating, and Abraham doesn't want that to happen. Margie says he doesn't want it because they are pagans. Okay, so I think you all did a great job, and I would agree with the preponderance there that we know later on, if you've read more of the Old Testament, that God forbids Abraham's many, many descendants, the Israelites, forbids them from intermarrying with pagan nations, because what happens is that they bring in their gods and their culture into what God is preserving for the line for the Messiah to come through to preserve one people group, which, my goodness, I mean, that was not easy to do because we're all so sinful, but not to have them absorbed into the cultures around them. So you can see kind of Abraham kind of getting that himself right now, even though God hasn't specifically said that. So enter Nahor. Nahor is Abraham's brother, and he is a worshiper of the one true God. And we know this because later in Genesis chapter 35, verse 53, it says, the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So at that point, it indicates that, yes, Abraham's brother, who lives in Mesopotamia, is a follower of God. I'm sure through Abraham came to know God like that. Remember that this is still a time where intermarrying within a family is perfectly normal. There are not the genetic problems that we have today, so it didn't present medical problems to do that. It was very, very normal to do something like that. So what's going to end up happening here is that Isaac is going to end up marrying his, I believe I'm right on this, first cousin once removed. Which means I can really relate to this. Let me share you this example, and I think it will like click. So my dad's youngest brother is only 9 years older than I am. There was a big age span there, obviously, in between them. And my uncle Jay is only 9 years older than me. We're more like brother and sister, I guess, than aunt and uncle, or uncle and niece. Anyway, he and his wife Mary Beth had children a little bit later after they got married. So what happened was my uncle and I had children basically at the same time. Like they're literally like stair stepped. So my children, no, let me say, I am a first cousin to my uncle's kids who are my kids' age. Oh yeah. So that really cleared it up, didn't it? Boy, aren't you glad I went through that? It makes it so much easier. Um, if you followed that at all, which I apologize because I made that harder than it needed to be. Anyway, that's kind of what happened here. So we just have like a generational gap, but we basically have cousins getting married. Okay. I know you're just dying to know all that. Let's move on to something that does actually matter, which is the text. So here we are, verses 5 to 9. The servant said to him, Abraham, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. In other words, what if she won't come back? He says, must I then take your son, Isaac, back to the land from which you came? So, what he's just saying here is, okay, so I'm just trying to think through all the possibilities. We have options on the table. What if I find the right girl and she's like, I don't want to leave and go to some land I've never been to meet my husband I've never met, although arranged marriages were pretty normal at this time. He goes, so in that case, do you want me to come back and get Isaac and maybe like move him there? And that way he can still marry in your family. But so let's see what Abraham says to him. He says, see to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring, I will give this land. He's probably pointing at it. This land right here, the land that we're standing on. He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. So The servant obviously is concerned. Abraham says, no dice on that. Do not take Isaac out of here. And I think we all know the reason why he would be so adamant about that is because of what he said. God promised this land. Don't take him out of it. We're finally here. We need to stay here. So we're going to trust God to provide. But if for some reason God has a different plan here that I'm not aware of, that's fine. But do not take Isaac out and take him back there. So I think Abraham is just exhibiting amazing faith here. So here we go. This is a great story. The servant says, okay, I swear, here we go. Verses 10 to 14. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master, the dowry basically. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor, obviously named for Abraham's brother. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women would go out to draw water. So in the cool of the day, the women would come with their pots on their shoulders. They would get water from the well. They would take it back home. And so the servant prays and he says, "O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, 'Please, let down your jar that I may drink,' who shall say, 'Drink, and I will water your camels.' Let her be the one that you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master." So the servant makes a request of God to help him know which girl is the right girl. So he says, I'll ask a girl for a drink, which, she would probably say yes to because of the hospitality of the Middle East at this time. But he adds something significant to it. He said, I don't want her just to say yes to me. I want her on her own to say, absolutely, have a drink. And hey, while you're drinking, I'm going to water your camels for you as well. Hmm. It says, before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the son of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her jar of water on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She was a virgin. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. So you can picture it's not just like a spring coming up from the ground, or the camels could just stick their faces in it and drink out of it. They have to go down. Maybe there's a ladder, maybe there's steps, I'm not sure, to wherever the spring is, the well, and they're going to draw their water. They've got to come back up out of it. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water to drink from your jar." She said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water. And she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. Now, maybe you're thinking, really? He stood there gazing to see if the Lord had prospered. I mean, isn't it clear? Like, yeah, he just did. I mean, she's watering your camel, so I guess that's a yes. Um, unless you're like camel familiar, there's a lot here that we in our culture miss. That if we lived in this time, we would absolutely have picked up from the text. So I'm going to do a little studying camel and drinking habits for you because it's all going to make sense in a minute. First of all, we know from the scripture that it says until the camels were done drinking. This is what the servant is watching for. Is she going to give a little bit of water to the camels, or is she going to fully water these camels? What she volunteered for here is kind of unbelievable. First of all, I don't know how big the jar was, but I'm guessing it was pretty big because this was not something that they would have brought a little cup back and forth, be back and forth 4,000 times every day. They wanted enough water to be able to cook with and do whatever else they needed to. It's in a pot, like pottery, which is already heavy. And water, as you know, is really heavy. So she's got this enormously heavy, probably rather large pot on her shoulder. She has just walked down a number of steps or on a ladder, probably steps. I don't know how you could carry it on a ladder, probably steps or descended some way into this well, got in the water, hefted it up on her shoulder, and she pours it all in the trough. Now, there are 10 camels. Camels drink a lot of water, especially when they've had a long journey and they're very, very thirsty. In fact, one source I read said 10, I'm going to read it. 10 camels, here, I'll pop it up, will drink somewhere between 140 and 250 gallons by the time they are through. Oh my word. How many hours did this take her? Back and forth with this huge, heavy pot of water on her shoulder, dumped it into the trough. Back down the steps she goes, gets more water. Back up the steps she goes, dumps it into the trough. So the servant is sitting there watching this going, is she going to finish the job? Because if she finishes this job, she's the one. I mean, this girl is unbelievable. I really never knew this aspect of the story. I always kind of thought that the servant was like, oh, I'll put a test out for God. Let's see, what could I come up with? I don't know, like if a frog crosses our path, no, not that. I don't know, like if a storm cloud goes by, no. Let's say if she waters the camels, no. It wasn't just some random, meaningless test that he was giving the Lord. He was looking for a specific kind of girl. Remember that Abraham was incredibly wealthy, incredibly well known, incredibly respected. He was the promised, like through his line would come the promised Messiah. So this isn't just a, hey, go find some girl. If she looks great, she sounds good, that'll be just fine. This has to be someone worthy on human levels of the position of marrying the heir, the only son, right? The son of promise for Abraham. So this servant devises something that is almost impossible to think that somebody is going to pull off. What girl in her right mind will volunteer this? And then not just volunteer it stupidly and then get like, I don't know, 40 gallons in and go, I don't know what I was thinking. I cannot do this. I'm sorry, sir. Do you think your camels are done? Because they seem like they're fine. You're going to have, or here's my pot. You go do it. I'm tired. I can't do this anymore. She does it to the end until the camels were completely watered. Unbelievable. Well, we're out of time to see what happens next, but next week we will pick up and see what the servant does in response to Rebekah doing this amazing act of hospitality, marking herself unwittingly as worthy to marry the heir of promise. This is, I don't know, I always say God writes the best stories. Like Disney can't touch it, but it almost sounds like a Disney fairy tale, doesn't it? Like this girl just goes out. This is like the Cinderella, right? She goes out with her water. She's beautiful. And she just happens to meet this stranger and he asks for a drink and she just happens to offer to water his camels and she becomes like the princess because she does this. And what happens next is really heartwarming. And it just, I don't know, for all of us girls out there who ever dreamed of being a princess someday, it's like you look at Rebekah and you go, oh, what an amazing, amazing story. But the best part about it is that it's true. Unbelievable. Well, I love you all so much. And I thank you for hanging out with me this Monday night. We will be back next Monday night to finish this story and start in on whatever's next in the book of Genesis. If you ever want to be a part of our Facebook group, I know some of you watch on YouTube. You can join us on Bible Study Hub on Facebook. It's a great group. We pray for each other and support each other. It's the nicest group on Facebook anywhere. I am absolutely sure of that. It's always so kind and so loving. And if you are ever looking to catch up on something that you missed, the easiest place to do that is on our YouTube channel, also Bible Study Hub, where everything is nice and neat and in order. Well, thank you again for being with us. I love you all, and I will see you next Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a good week.